Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd. So let's go back, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, reading from the introduction of Dr. Muhammad Ajaj al-Khatib, of the life of Khatib al-Baghdadi, rahimahullah ta'ala. In the first part, we mentioned his name, his lineage, where he was born, when he was born, the environment in which he grew up, some of his early scholars, and his two main fields of expertise with regards to al-Hadith and with regards to al-Fiqh. Al-Hadith and Fiqh. Of course, he studied the Quran, the Arabic languages and the sciences, the Arabic language and the sciences and the other things which are necessary as well. But his two main talents were Hadith and Fiqh. And we also mentioned that Khatib al-Baghdadi, rahimahullah ta'ala, was a great historian. He was a mu'arrikh. He was a man of tarikh. And that was manifested in his tremendous book, Tarikh Baghdad. Khairan, inshaAllah ta'ala. We also mentioned how he went back and forth from different cities, Nishapur, Asfahan, Damascus, different parts of Syria, different parts of Iraq, Kufa, Basra, the other cities, towns, and villages and regions, and how he went to Damascus countless times, right? He went to Mecca, he traveled to the Hijaz, he went to go make Hajj there, and the different things that he did when he was there. Khairan, inshaAllah ta'ala. We mentioned all of that. Also, we mentioned briefly about some of the controversy, some of the problems that he went through with regards to enemies, friends, allies, friends, foes, and obviously the long story and discussion of alliances and the danger of alliances and the danger of political alliances. And of course, we know the necessity of alliances and oftentimes the necessity of political alliances. Sometimes you have no choice. But it's very sensitive and a flammable, volatile type of thing. And people oftentimes, especially people of power and influence, they make alliances only based off of benefit and of convenience. And that's the way of the world. That's the way of the world. Convenience, unfortunately. But when it comes to political alliances, and someone feels that they're above, bigger, greater than you, you'll be used, exploited, utilized, taken advantage of, and discarded when the alliance is of no more benefit. And that's how politics works. Whether we like it or whether we like it not. That's how things work, right? Khairan, inshaAllah ta'ala. So, the danger of Muslim scholars having connections and allegiances with people of power and wealth and influence, that's proven in history. Many people are very fickle, very sometimey. They'll be friends, they'll protect you, they'll support you, they'll champion you in your cause when it's good for them and their cause. And the moment that it's not, you could lose your life, you could lose your freedom, you could lose your honor, you'll be slandered, and the list of things that can take place in this world. وَلَا حَوْلَ وَلَا قُوَّةَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. طيب. He mentions here the 8th point, مَرَضُهُ وَوَفَاتُهُ. It talks about his sickness, his death illness. لما شعر الخطيب بدنو أجله كتب إلى القائم بأمر الله إني إذا مت يكون مالي لبيت المال لأنه لا عقب له فليؤذن لي حتى أفرقه على من شئت فأذن له ففرقها على المحدثين. He says that when Khatib realized that his time was near, when he came to the understanding and the realization that his time was near, that death was about to come to him, he wrote to Al-Qa'im bi Amrillah, from the leaders, that when I die, I want all of my wealth to go to the treasury of the Muslims. Khatib had no children. He had no offspring. And please allow me to have my wealth, have all my estate, have everything now, the way I can prepare it. And he donated it to the scholars of Hadith. All of my wealth will belong to the ulama of Hadith. قال مكي الرميلي: مرض الخطيب في رمضان من سنة 63 في نصفه إلى أن اشتد به الحال في أول ذي الحجة، مات يوم سابعه، وأوصى إلى أبي الفضل بن خيرون ووقف كتبه على يده وفرق ماله في وجوه البر. Then he talks about Makki al-Rumayli, this alim. He says that Khatib al-Baghdadi, he became very sick in Ramadan in the year, he says, 63, meaning 460. 460 is when he first got sick. What did he get sick from? Allahu alam. It's not mentioned here. Was it some type of stomach cancer, or some type of flu, or pneumonia, some other type of virus, diabetes? Allahu alam. Allahu alam, where the wound or the illness and the sickness came from. And then in Dhul Hijjah, he became very sick. It says the year, 463, 63, the year of his death, 463. He became sick in Ramadan, and he became very, very ill in Dhul Hijjah, and he died on the 7th day of Dhul Hijjah. He died during the first 10 days. And he made this man, Abu al-Fadl ibn Khayrun, his wasi, to execute his will in his estate, and he gave him and donated all of his books, and he put all of his money in donation and charity. What a good way to go out. May Allah have mercy upon his soul. وشيعه القضاة وكثير من أهل العلم والأشراف والفقهاء والعامة وخلق كثير، أمهم القاضي أبو الحسين بن المهتدي بالله، ودفن بجنب بشر الحافي. And then he talks about how many people came to his funeral, and how the judges, the scholars, the nobles, the aristocrats, the people who led the funeral procession, carried his body, and the scholars who prayed over him, and how he was buried next to Bishr al-Hafi. Then he mentions here about the people who spoke about his funeral, and what a incident, or it was a thing to see, a thing to witness. Moving forward, he says here, number 9, أهم صفاته وخصائصه, the most important of Khatib al-Baghdadi's attributes, the most important of his character, his morals, how he held and conducted himself. And one may say, perhaps it was best to mention this before his death. Allahu alam. Is his biography, him writing it. He can speak about it how he wishes to. He says, قال أبو سعد السمعاني: كان الخطيب مهيبا وقورا ثقة متهريا حجة حسن الخط كثير الضبط فصيحا ختم به الحفاظ. Khatib al-Baghdadi rahimahullah, he demanded a great deal of respect from people. People venerated him and they looked up to him. He was trustworthy. He was very scrupulous or meticulous. He had very, very fine penmanship. He could write very well. He's very accurate and precise in what he wrote. And he was eloquent. He was fasih. He spoke well. And he was the last of the true great masters. The last of the true huffaz Khatib al-Baghdadi was. كان يحدث في جامع دمشق، فإذا قرأ الحديث يسمع صوته في آخر الجامع، كان يقرأ معربا صحيحا، كان حسن الهيئة، ملتزما بآداب أهل العلم طلبا وتدريسا، وعالما عاملا، عزيز النفس متواضعا. قال له سعيد المؤدب عند لقائه له: أنت الحافظ أبو بكر؟ فقال: أنا أحمد بن علي. انتهى الحفظ إلى الدارقطني. And they talk about how he acted upon his knowledge, how he was pious, he was righteous, and he was aziz al-nafs. He didn't allow anyone to ridicule him or to play him or to humiliate him. Or as we say in our culture, He didn't allow anyone to play him. All right, he wasn't soft. He wasn't some naive fool, a push-around fool. And it's very important for us to understand this. Many people, they think and they feel that just because you're a student of knowledge or a scholar of Islam, that you just have to be a fool and a naive push-around and let anyone say or do anything that they want to you. It doesn't mean that, okay? And at the same time, he says, mutawadi'an. He's very humble. He was very humble. He had a great deal of humility. He wasn't a person that puffed himself up with pride, but at the same time, he had izzat nafs. And obviously, that's a long discussion with regards to, is that possible and practical to even strike that balance? Moving forward, whenever he taught or learned or gave knowledge, he always kept the proper etiquette. One day, it mentions here that a man met him and he says, "You're Hafiz al-Khatib, you're Hafiz Abu Bakr." He says, "I'm Ahmad ibn Ali, no one else." The last of the great masters was Daraqutni, rahimahullah ta'ala. طيب. And then he mentions a few other stories and a few other incidents with regards to people bearing witness to his greatness and his humility, so on and so forth. طيب. Then he mentions point number 10, أشهر من روى عنه, the most famous of his students, those who narrated from him. And of course, the mark of a great scholar is oftentimes by who he learned from, and oftentimes who that scholar produces. My students, my disciples, people that learn from me. The quality, the number, the abundance, how frequent, what did you produce of actual student, people that learned from you. Not books, but human beings that learned from you and that have went on and become great scholars and students and teachers themselves. That is one of the most important marks of a great person, a person who has left behind a legacy. روى عنه خلق كثير بعضهم شيوخه ومنهم أقرانه روى عنهم ورووا عنه وآخرون طلابه حضروا حلقاته وتخرجوا به. He says many people narrated from him, countless people. Some of those people were his own teachers. Some of those people were his contemporaries, his friends. Some of those people he narrated from and they narrated from him, vice versa. And others were just students. They sat in his classes, his lectures, and they graduated from him. And this goes to show us how the different scholars narrated, took from each other, and it wasn't just only me, only him, only my sheikh, but they learned and they benefited from each other. منهم شيخه أحمد بن بكر ابن محمد ابن منهم شيخه أحمد بن محمد أبو بكر البرقاني وشيخه أبو القاسم الأزهري ومن أقراني أبو إسحاق الشيرازي وأبو الفضل أحمد بن حسن بن خيرون وأبو محمد الكتاني والحافظ أبو نصر وعلي بن هبة الله بن ماكولا وأبو الحسين المبارك بن عبد الجبار الطيوري وأبو عبد الله الحميدي المغربي الأندلسي ونصر بن إبراهيم المقدسي. He mentioned some of his different students, those who learned from him. His own sheikh, okay, Al-Burqani, Abu al-Qasim al-Azhari, Abu Ishaq al-Shirazi, Ibn Makula, and many other greats as well. Next point he says here, مكانته على العلمية. What was his status, the caliber of his scholarship? جمهور أهل العلم مطبق على إمامة الخطيب البغدادي في الحديث وعلومه وتحريه وإتقانه وعلو منزلته في التاريخ والتراجم، غير أن بعض أهل العلم تهمه بالتعصب وهم نفر قليل من الحنابلة والحنفية عدوه ممن طعن في أئمة مذهبهم أو في بعض شيوخ المذهب ممن ترجم لهم الخطيب في تاريخ بغداد، ومما أخذ عليه ابن الجوزي احتجاج بالأحاديث الموضوعة في مصنفاته، وقد تكفل دارس الخطيب برد تلك التهم وهو بريء منها. طيب. He says here, the author states, the muhaqqiq here, he says that most of the people of knowledge unanimously hold Khatib al-Baghdadi as a champion, as a master, a great master, and how he was accurate, how he was fair, and how he was an awesome intellectual. But there are some who hold the view that he was a fanatic, and some who hold the view that he had certain mistakes and errors and things like this. Though those were the Hanbalis and some Hanafis. And this here is a great proof, strong evidence, a back-breaking evidence rather, proving the fallacy and the stupidity of the people today who say that you can't take nothing from a person because this person made this mistake. Or you can't learn from this person because this person has personal problems with these brothers. Or you can't learn from this person because Sheikh Fulan doesn't like him. If that was the case, there would not remain a scholar. There would not remain a book on the Islamic library or the shelf of the Islamic library. Khatib al-Baghdadi had critics. People spoke about him, criticized him, and accused him of things. Were they right or were they wrong? That's besides the point. Maybe they were wrong and everyone else was right. But the fact of the matter is that he was criticized. People did not agree with him. People didn't like him. And according to these people today, they say that the moment a person is criticized, or someone writes a paper on you, or speaks about you, or Sheikh Fulan says you're unclear, then you can't take anything from that person. And if you don't do so, then you're not a Salafi, and you're a deviant, and you're not following the way of the Sunnah. And to the list of the other stupid things that they say and force upon the people and shove down the people's throats, unfortunately. So we see that that isn't correct here. There were people who did criticize Khatib al-Baghdadi. And he mentions here, from the things that they criticized about him, was Khatib al-Baghdadi attacking some of their scholars from their madhabs, whether it's Abu Hanifa or other than Abu Hanifa, mentioning the history of Iraq, of Baghdad, of those who came to the Qaryat Salama. Moving forward, he says Ibn al-Jawzi, rahimahullah, obviously from the 6th century. Ibn al-Jawzi came about maybe 200 years later, more than 200 years. He criticized him for using fabricated hadiths in his books. And of course, that's very strange and quite ironic. Whereas Ibn al-Jawzi, rahimahullah, was also known for using weak hadiths in his books as well. Tayyib. Ibn al-Jawzi was a great scholar. I've also done a biography of him. You can find that on the channel as well. He was a great alim of hadith of the same country of Baghdad, of Iraq, right? But of course, Ibn al-Jawzi was Hanbali. He was Hanbali. And there was beef, and there were wars, and there was problem between the Hanafis, Shafi'is, Hanbalis, etc. So you already know the nature of things. I do want to mention here, it's very interesting that some scholars criticized him for using those fabricated hadiths in his books. And many of the books of Khatib Baghdadi have been translated into English. And most of the translators, 9 out of 10, they don't say anything about that. And it leaves the reader, obviously, in a great deal of confusion, especially if they come along and they put in the footnotes, Sheikh Al-Albani said this hadith is fabricated. Sheikh Al-Albani says the hadith is weak. Sheikh Al-Albani says the hadith is munkar. So the people have been taught that there are no weak hadiths that can be used. All fabricated hadiths, not fabricated, weak hadiths are of no use. Al-Albani is the one who decides what's authentic, what's not authentic, Sahih, Hasan, Da'if, and that's it. Silsila Hadith Sahih, Sahih Al-Jaami, that's it. But now we have this great scholar 1,000 years ago, 800 years ago, using all of these hadiths page after page after page, fabricated, munkar, wahin jiddan. And then translator, they put nothing in the footnotes, nothing in the introduction explaining how is this. And we've explained this before when we spoke on Fadl al-Ilm al-Salafi ala Ilm al-Khalaf of Ibn Rajab, rahimahullah, how many people they translated these books and they did not give the proper explanations, the proper dawah. But that's because most of them didn't know them themselves. They weren't taught the proper way. And it allows them, that is a huge problem, especially for those who force upon the people and say that the way of the Salafis is not to use any weak hadith, not to mention any weak hadiths. Jamaat Tabligh are deviants because of these weak hadiths. The Sufis use weak hadiths. These people use weak hadiths. This book has weak hadiths in it. But then you open up a book of a classic traditional scholar such as Ibn Rajab, Khatib Baghdadi, Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Qayyim, Ibn al-Jawzi of this century, of that century, and 4 or 5 pages in a row, footnote, weak, fabricated. Now it's a huge problem. The layman person will become confused, and the people who have ulterior motives or hidden agendas or open agendas, they will attack. And they'll say, look at your contradiction. Look at your double standard. You attack us, but look at your books. You call us Sufis, you say we're upon innovation, Jama'at Tabligh, but look at your books. So this is a huge problem that we've spoken on many years ago. And unfortunately, not too many people have addressed it, and they keep continuing, they keep translating more and more books with this clash, in which you have Al-Bani in the footnotes, Ibn Rajab in the text, Ibn Taymiyyah in the text, Al-Bani in the footnotes. In the text, Ibn Taymiyyah is quoting the hadith and is not saying anything about it. He's mentioned the hadith and he's not saying anything about it. All right, and in the footnotes, batil, munkar, da'if jiddan, mawdu', fabricated. There lies no doubt. At least the least a person can say is that there's a huge problem and a great discrepancy, and it's going to open the door for many different woes. Khairan inshallah ta'ala. So he mentions here that those different claims that they made against the Khatib al-Baghdadi were incorrect. And those were people who had different feelings against him, and there's no severe scholastic criticism made against him. Moving forward, we're not here to discuss that in detail, right? Who was right, who was wrong. What's important is he was a great scholar. Then he mentions point number 12, مصنفاته, his books, the books that he wrote. اشتهر الخطيب بكثرة التصنيف وحسن التصنيف أو حسن التأليف والاعتناء به والتدقيق في البحث والاستقصاء فيما يتطرق إليه من الموضوعات، حتى ذكروا كثير ممن ترجم له بأنه صاحب التصانيف أو إمام مصنف أو أحد الأئمة المشهورين والمصنفين المكثرين. قال فيه ابن الجوزي: وصنف الكتب الحسانة البعيدة المثل، وأكثر المصنفات في الحديث وعلومه وآدابه وتخريج الحديث ورجاله وفي الفقه والأصول والزهد والرقائق والأدب والتاريخ والمناقب والعقائد بغير ذلك. وذكر الصمعاني أنه صنف قريبا من 100 مصنف صارت عمدة لأصحاب الحديث. ونقل الإمام الذهبي عن السمعاني قوله له 56 مصنفا. So first and foremost, Khatib al-Baghdadi was a very prolific writer. He was a prolific writer. His pen was swift and sharp. And many scholars, they mention how many different books he wrote. And he was an imam of authoring. He was an epic legend of an author. Okay. Some say he had over 100 books that he wrote. And some say that he had over 56 books that he wrote. And when we say books, guys, we're not talking about a novel. We're not talking about 300-page novel. We're not talking about a story. We're talking about one book could be 50 volumes. One book could be 30 volumes. One book could be 20 volumes. One book could be 100 volumes. Literally, without no exaggeration. Okay? When they say musannaf, it's not talking about, oh, this person, he wrote a novel. Okay? He's a novelist. A 500-page novel. La. They're talking about mujalladat. Volumes upon volumes. And of course, other books could be 2 volumes, and the list goes on. So he wrote a great deal of books. Most of those books were about usul al-fiqh, about hadith, some books about aqidah, of course, books about history. And of course, our agenda is his contribution to hadith and ilm al-hadith. And from the most famous of those books and from the most beneficial of them is Tarikh Baghdad. Also, Sharaf Ashab al-Hadith, Al-Kifaya fi ilmi usul al-riwayah, Al-Faqih wal-Mutathaqih, right? And then many other books that Khatib al-Baghdadi rahimahullah ta'ala wrote, which are all in the libraries. And many people say that he was the one who took on the legacy of Ali ibn al-Madini, the teacher of Imam al-Bukhari, and explained, collected what was lost, gathered what was dispersed, put it together, organized it, and categorized it. And many people, they say that Khatib Baghdadi rahimahullah, the people are alatun ala kutub al-Khatib. That everyone is feasting off of his table spread. Everyone who came after him had to eat and take from him. They had to eat and they had to take from him, right? طيب. And it's also very interesting here how he mentions that Ibn al-Jawzi, who criticized him, also praised him. And he said that his books are amazing. Ba'idat al-mathal. All right? His books are the standard for other books after him. Naam. Khair inshallah. What's important is, in brief, concluding this session, Khatib al-Baghdadi was a great scholar of the 5th century. He died 463. And he was Hafidh al-Mashriq, the scholar, the master of the East. Just like Ibn Abdul Barr was Hafidh al-Maghrib, of that time, the master of the West. He wrote many great books, contributed tremendously to the Islamic library at a whole or at large, and the Hadith library in particular. And those who wish to read more about his life, you can do so bi'idhnillahi ta'ala in countless books in Arabic. And you can do so also in English as well, whereas there are many books of his that have been translated into English and have mentioned his biography. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.